Murderballs in Rise of Kingdoms are very important. Having the correct murderball can make all the difference on the open field for your trades and obviously for your whole kingdom and possibly your KVK. So today, I'm going to be going over the best murderball, looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 March murderballs that you could run, going over the newest meta commanders, the shiniest pairings, and which ones are going to be the best on the open field. So if you're interested in the best open field pairings as of, I think it's April 2025 now, you want to stick around till the end of the video. Now, before we dive into the pairings, I'm going to quickly say, how did I decide upon the commanders and the pairings that I chose today? First of all, I pretty much just looked at open field reports and open field testing and decided from that, looking at which commanders did the best, which commanders are not so hot right now, and I built a ball around that. The next thing to note is as we get further in and your murder ball gets bigger and bigger, obviously there are going to be less meta commanders in there and pairings that may not be as strong. Reason being, when you get to a lot of commanders, when you get 14 commanders, for example, if you have 7 marches, you're looking at a lot of older commanders, and that's going to make it really difficult to get absolutely meta. So I will at some point mention when the best spot it is for free-to-play players to stop, because at some point free-to-play low spenders shouldn't invest anymore because the commanders might fall out of the meta a little bit too quickly. Other than that though, let's just go over the first march, and really with your first march, you can pick any of the 3 troop types. I'm going to go over all 3, but in my opinion, the best first pickup would be an infantry march. Unlike the other 2 marches, archers and cavalry, infantry are very self-sufficient. They don't need another troop type to go with them. Cavalry, there's a few debuffs like Nevsky's active skill where you kind of want to have other commanders with him, but infantry are fully on their own. In my opinion, the best infantry march to pick up first would be a Ragnar Lodbrok with a Scipio Africanus. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they're the best investments in terms of investment potential, but in terms of literal open field capacity, they're currently the strongest first march in my opinion. It's a double AoE beast. It doesn't need any other marches to perform. Doesn't really need many, like, you don't really have to have other marches to fully benefit from them, even though CPO having more marches is nice because he does give you that health debuff. It's still going to be really good for him himself with a Ragnar Prime. So for the first march, I highly recommend a Ragnar with a CPO if you can get it. If you have a Leo Chair, for example, a Leo Chair with an Alex or a Leo Chair with a William Wallace with the Leo Chair, that march can also work as a good first march. It is also pretty self-sufficient and doesn't really need another march. But in my opinion, Ragnar with CPO is going to be your better first choice of the 2 marches, and it's going to be the stronger one. But if you want to pick up the Leo Chair first with Alex or with William, it is certainly reasonable, and I can see it being a very powerful march as well. Moving on to the second march. The second march that you would want to look at is most likely a cavalry march, and it's just a pairing with Arthur Pendragon. That's either going to be a Nevsky or a Hauchabing with Arthur, depending on what you prefer as your first pickup. In my opinion, I would go with Nevsky first, just because as you build your murderball, it's nice to have his defense debuff, even though Hauchabing is technically going to trade better. I would rather the defense debuff to give everyone else an advantage on the open field, your other march, your infantry march, and if you get a 3rd and 4th march, Nevsky's defense debuff is going to be really good. Not to mention, at some point, you can upgrade to a Hauchabing and put Nevsky with a different commander, and that's going to be fine. If you don't really care about Nevsky's defense debuff, pick up Hauchabing, put him with Arthur Pendragon, and you're going to have a very solid second march as well. If you have really good smite armaments, you can definitely use Arthur as a primary, but I highly recommend for most players, use him as a secondary. I mean, he's got a really good AoE. His direct damage is perfectly fine. The only thing that you'd be missing is if you have the smite armaments, he is going to be better if they're like perfectly set up and you can do the combo bonuses. On top of that, if you have perfect armaments, Subutai could possibly be usable there, but in my opinion, I wouldn't really focus on him or even invest in him at all. Only use Arthur with combo if you have perfect armaments. Otherwise, run him as a secondary to Nevsky or Hauchabing, and you've got a very solid second march, and it's going to be quite fast and also fairly self-sufficient. Moving on to our third march, we're going to pick up my favorite commander pairing, Zulang with Herman Prime. It's a really, really good archer march. There's very solid AoE. Zulang's got a pretty decent debuff on his active skill, and it is fairly self-sufficient as well. Herman is pretty nice when you have more marches because the poison stacks will let you deal more AoE damage overall, but in general, you don't necessarily need them to be with another commander. You don't really need them to be with other commanders in general. It's just nicer to have archer commanders within a bit of a bigger ball, because they're obviously not the tankiest, and you want to have other troops who can tank a bit more damage factor rather than just your archer marchers. So since infantry are more tanky and cavalry are a bit more tanky, you would rather get them first, in my opinion, and the fact that archers right now are not the best in the meta, which I hate to say, are probably a good reason to get them in the third or the last place. So generally, for your first top 3 marchers, archers would come in last. Now, then again, like I said before, you can use any of the 3 marchers I just spoke about as your first choice, depending on if you're maining a troop type. I just think infantry are the best first choice right now because of how good Ragnar with CPO can be, and the fact that it doesn't need any other marchers, and it doesn't really have any insane debuffs that you need to have. Nevsky or Hao Bing with Arthur is a really good second pickup, and then you want to go Zulang with a Herman. So that's your top 3 marchers. Any 3 of those in any order can work depending on what you want to invest in. I just gave, in my opinion, the best investment order for the marchers that you would want to pick up just for that top 3. This is also where most free-to-play players should stop, one of each troop type. Now, you can keep going up until you reach about 5 marchers. After that, I would certainly stop for a free-to-play low spender. But having access to 3 marchers as a free-to-play, in my opinion, is certainly enough. It's going to give you a nice amount of time between each commander release to focus on new meta commanders. You only need to get 1 set of each legendary equipment. You can really focus on armaments, and you're going to have a very solid 3-march ball. 3 marches, in my opinion, is the optimal spot for any free-to-play low spender. Gives you enough time to cycle through commanders, gives you enough time to invest in the new meta commanders, but you can, again, go further on depending on how many marches you want. But as we get to 4, 5, 6, and 7 marches, we're going to be looking at slightly less meta, slightly less overpowered commanders, and that obviously is going to be quite impactful if you're free to play, because you're going to be investing in commanders that just may lose their time in the meta a little bit faster than other commanders, and that's going to cost you quite a few gold heads, and it's going to be hard to upkeep unless you're in a really big whaley kingdom where you're getting a lot of gold chests, and you're obviously being able to do some of those really high level events and really high KVKs. But other than that, 3 marches, best spot for free to play low spenders. Moving on to 4 marches though. Really, when we look at a 4th march, I just recommend picking up the infantry march, which you didn't get. Hopefully you didn't get Liuche with Alex. In my opinion, it's the better 4th march. It isn't the best trading march of the 2 infantry. While it's a really good trading march, Liuche, Alex, Ragnar with Scipio Africanus, in my opinion, is the better trading of the 2. Now, that being said, Liuche with Alex is a certainly good pairing to pick up. And if you're a free-to-play low spender at this point, you can still definitely get away with running them. It just comes down to the fact that they aren't going to be the most meta for a while. We expect to see infantry commanders next, which means we could see more smite. We really could see a big shake-up with Liuche Alex. But it's a good 4th march. It's very solid. You're going to have nice smite damage. You're going to have really good abilities and DPS coming out of the march. It just isn't the most overpowered meta march compared to the first 3 that we spoke about. But even then, it can be a solid, good investment. And Ragnar with CPO, if you didn't pick that up initially, I highly recommend getting it for your 4th march. It is going to be one of the better choices. For the 5th march, we're going to be looking at another cavalry march. At this point, what you want to do is with your Arthur, definitely put him with Hao Bing. You want to split up if it was a Nevsky before. So if you had a Nevsky with an Arthur Pendragon, invest in Hao Bing, run Hao Bing with Arthur, and then just run Nevsky with Joan. It's a solid march still nowadays, not overly overpowered, but it's solid enough to make the 5th spot, because at this point we're kind of struggling to get real meta commanders. But Nevsky with Joan is a very solid pickup at this point. It's going to be good in your 5 march ball. It's got really nice double AoE on Joan's active skill, and you're still going to be able to benefit from Nevsky's defense reduction, especially now that you have up to 5 marches. A side note, you can run Nevsky with Belisarius if you want a very weird open field debuff march, but it isn't very good, and in my opinion, I would still run the Joan with Nevsky. Now, if you really need debuffs, go with Belisarius for whatever reason. Maybe you are often swarming rallies or garrisons. It might be worth running the Belisarius over a Joan, but if you're kind of just focusing field, Nevsky Joan is going to be better, though Belisarius does hold that niche for very heavy swarmers, and if you're getting to 5 march territory, you could be one of the main people who swarms down rallies or garrisons for your kingdom, and in that case, Belly Prime is a fairly solid pickup to put with Nevsky, and it's a good single target, very heavy debuffing march that's going to be able to nuke down a lot of rallies or garrisons if that's what you need. But for most players, pick up Joan, put her with Nevsky, and then run Hao Bing with a Arthur Pendragon, and you're in a very solid position. Moving on to the 6th march, this is where we're kind of running out of very solid commanders. We haven't really looked at Philip II. He is a very good commander. He is easily replaceable with a lot of other commanders. So for example, instead of running a legal chair with an Alex, you can run a legal chair with a Philip. You can kind of slot him in everywhere. There's a ton of videos on Philip out there. I have some of my own. So if you need to, you can look at them. But for the 6th March, I just recommend going with a Shajar Philip. Shajar is quite a powerful commander in terms of she's got good single target damage, and she's quite tanky for an archer commander. And she could be meta if we see a lot of Mighty Heal in the near future. And in that case, Philip with Shajar can be a really powerful March, and it's going to trade pretty good. Now, it's not going to be the most overpowered, but if you want to get a hold of Philip's buffs for your other Marches, in my opinion, it is quite worth it. You can also run a Boudica with a Philip, in my opinion, not the best March, but it is a possibility. Though, from what I've heard, Philip with Shajar is the better of the 2 Marches, and it's going to be quite good. So if you need a 6th March and you want to get a Philip, in my opinion, that is going to be your best pickup. In terms of the 7th March, this is going to be the final March, and generally at this point, you can kind of choose what you want. If you want to get another infantry, another archer, or another cavalry, you can, but I recommend just getting a ranged March. Now, I always forget the best range pairing, so if I get this wrong, I highly recommend checking out a different video someone else has made about ranged. But I think Gonzalo with Margaret is the best range March. I'm pretty sure about that. The 2 new range commanders, from what I've heard, are not the most insane. They're not too interesting. But generally, when it comes down to it, Gonzalo with Margaret is going to be the stronger ranged March if you want to have a ranged March in your Murderball. Now, that being said, ranged are good right now, but they're not most meta-breaking commanders in the game. If you want to pick up another one of the other troop types, it's going to be kind of hard. For example, with cavalry, you've used most of the good commanders. If you didn't invest in Belisarius, you can maybe do like a Zhang Yu with a Belisarius. Very weird pairing, might not be too nice. You can do an Attila with a Subutai, possibly. That is another option. And it's going to be a good March for the open field, but not the most meta. You're going to have the best edit combo armaments to be able to run the March properly. It is usable, but not the most overpowered thing for the field. For archers, your 3rd March could be quite easy. Just a Boudica with an Ashurbanipal. If you ran Boudica with Philip, you can go Shajar with YSG or Ashurbanipal as well, and that's going to work. And for your infantry March, you can really just pick up something with a Guan, which isn't going to be the most overpowered. Really, infantry only have 2 very good Marches, but if you had to pick up a 3rd, Tarek with Sargon or Tarek with Guan could be options, but they wouldn't be main pickups in my opinion if you're getting to 7 Marches. If you have them unlocked and expertise already, you can run them, but I don't think they're going to be the most overpowered 7 March commander. So now, as a quick rundown in order without all the extra information, for your 1st March, you're going to want to run, hopefully, a Ragnar Prime with a Scipio Africanus. For your 2nd March, you're going to run a Cavalry March, and that's going to be an Arthur Pendragon secondary to Nevsky or Hao Bing, depending on which commander you do prefer. Then for your 3rd March, you're going to run a Zulang with a Herman. For your 4th March, you're just going to run another infantry march, a Leal Chair with an Alex or a William Wallace with a Leal Chair secondary. Both the marches are pretty solid. For your 5th March, you're going to want to run another cavalry march. It's most likely going to be a Nevsky Joan or a Nevsky Belisarius if you swarm a lot of garrisons. And then a Hao Bing with an Arthur Pendragon. For your 6th March, you're going to want to run a Shajar or a Boudica Prime with a Philip II. And finally, for your 7th March, you can either run another cavalry, archer, or infantry march that we just spoke about, or a ranged march. I think it's Gonzalo with Margaret I, and that's going to give you your best Murderball for the open field right now. We're probably going to see new infantry commanders soon. Hopefully, I would like to make some cool videos about them. And if we do see new infantry commanders, obviously the best Murderball is 100% going to change. And that being said, in my opinion right now, the best spot for free-to-play players to stop is up to 5 marches at the absolute maximum. Anything beyond 5 marches is a free-to-play low spender. You're getting into a lot of weaker commanders. You're looking at commanders like Shajar, commanders like ranged commanders, and your 7th marches get really bad. Not to mention you need to have crystal tech for them. Other than that though, if you enjoyed today's video, found it helpful, interesting, or just entertaining, please do consider subscribing to the channel. It's a really small thing that really does help me out, and it is much appreciated. Other than that, I just want to say thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.